Hey guys, it's Megan. So in today's video, I'm going to be showing you guys how I made this DIY edible non-toxic Tide Pod. And I have been seeing these Tide Pod memes everywhere, and people just really want to eat Tide Pods for some reason. And I saw this post on Tumblr that somebody made with a hypothetical recipe that they made up, but they said that they had never tried it. So I wanted to try it, but I tweaked it a little bit so that it would be a little bit easier, and I'm going to show you guys how I did it. And I'll put the full recipe in the description. So without further ado, let's just get into the video. To make this, you will need 2 packets of Knox Gelatin, 1 pack of blue Jello, 1 pack of orange Jello, and a pack of Jello white chocolate or vanilla pudding. I feel like it would taste better with vanilla, but my store only had white chocolate. Start by making both packs of Jello according to the package directions. Mine told me to mix the packet with 1 cup of hot water until dissolved, and then put in 1 more cup of cold water, and then put it in the refrigerator to set. Next, pour the Jello mixture into some shallow containers. And it probably would have been easier to pour this into like a pan of some sort, but I guess I didn't really think of that, so I just used a couple different containers. Then I put these in the fridge to set overnight. I made my orange Jello the exact same way, and I went ahead and poured it into 3 more shallow containers. And next it's time to make the pudding, and I decided to use instant pudding, and the original recipe had you doing some sort of like complicated thing, but I just figured that this would be easier and it would give you the same result. So I put 2 cups of milk into a container, and I stirred in the pudding mixture until dissolved. And this needs to be refrigerated overnight as well. And now it's time to make the clear layer of our Tide Pods. So I'm going to be putting some parchment paper into this brownie pan. And here's what it should look like. Next, I put 8 tablespoons of water into a pot to boil on the stove, and the original recipe called for 6 tablespoons, but that seemed like it wasn't enough, so I decided to put 8. And I feel like you could get away with doing even a little bit more water, maybe like 10 tablespoons, to account for evaporation. So I went ahead and I poured in my gelatin, and then I mixed that up with a whisk until it was dissolved, and then I added in the second packet. And mixed it until it was almost all completely dissolved. And the reason that I say that you could add more water is because I wasn't able to dissolve all of it. I dissolved most of it, but I think that 10 tablespoons of water would be a better bet. Take the gelatin off of the stove and let it cool for a minute or 2. And pour the gelatin onto the parchment paper, making it into as even of a layer as possible. And once you're happy with it, go ahead and put it in the fridge overnight with everything else. Next, I made a little cookie cutter to make the swirls in the Tide Pod, and to do that, I'm using this aluminum pan. So first, I just cut out a section of the pan. Then, I folded down the top and bottom edges of the pieces that I just cut out, and make sure to be careful when you're doing this because the edges are very sharp. Fold the piece into a moon shape, and then cut off any excess. Then, use a piece of tape to attach the open edges together. And now you have a little cookie cutter. The next morning, I took the Jello out of the fridge, and then I used the cookie cutter to cut out little swirl shapes. And the orange Jello, since it was an off-brand Jello, it broke a little bit more easily than the regular Jello brand. So if I were to do this again, I would make sure to get the name brand Jello. I used a knife to help remove the Jello, and I put the pieces onto a piece of parchment paper that I put on top of a cookie sheet. And I did the same thing with the blue Jello. And once you're done, you should have a tray of Jello that looks like this. Next, I removed the sheet of gelatin from the parchment paper, and this came up pretty easily. And if I were to do this again, I think I would pour the gelatin onto a silicone mat or something a little bit flatter, because as you can see, the parchment paper caused the Jello to kind of wrinkle a little bit. Then I cut out 2 squares from the gelatin sheet, and make sure to cut these bigger than you think you'll need. And now it's time to assemble our Tide Pods. So take a spoonful of the white pudding and then put that onto the piece of gelatin. And just spread that around just a little bit. And then very carefully take your Jello and assemble it so that it looks like a Tide Pod. Then take the other gelatin sheet and place it on top. To seal the edges of our Tide Pod, I went ahead and I put it on a piece of parchment paper on top of a paper plate, and then I took a strip of parchment paper and I very carefully sealed the edges with an iron. And the iron melts the gelatin a little bit so that the edges will stick together. And be very careful when you're doing this. Repeat this on all of the edges, putting a piece of parchment paper in between your iron and the Tide Pod each time, and then put it into the fridge. Once it's cooled down, remove the parchment paper. And carefully remove your Tide Pod. Use a clean pair of scissors to carefully trim down the edges so that it is more of a square shape, being careful not to undo the seal. And now you have your very own edible, non-toxic Tide Pod. So thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, make sure to give it a thumbs up, and make sure to subscribe for more videos just like this one, and make sure to follow me on Instagram. It's @WellerMegs, and yeah, I love you guys so much, and I'll see you guys tomorrow. Bye!